Well, Ken, I'm actually at the age, so I saw you growing up. I actually wasn't following the UFC when Frank did his thing, so I'm much more familiar with you from the early days of going and renting the VCRs and watching the first few UFC. So I would never confuse you with the other Shamrock.
Well, that's the original, man, and I tell you, people, we talked about earlier in the show about NHB and MMA, and that's truly you talk to any of the guys in the very first fights, and when people start mentioning MMA, the first thing that most of them will probably say is like, that's not what it is. It's NHB. It's not MMA. People put that name on there to pretty it up or do whatever they wanted to do to it, but it's NHB, no holds barred. That's where it came from. That's how it originated, and that's what it is.
How was it for you when you first started? You were doing Pancrase and all that kind of thing, and then you did the UFC. How hard is it to train for something that all of a sudden doesn't have rules like you did, when you're doing the other fights? I mean, is it hard?
No, it was actually pretty simple because, like, when I was over in Japan, it was open hand strikes, and we wore knee pads and shin guards, and we really on the ground it was all submissions. We moved more for switches. Stand up was open hand kicks, punches, and throws. But, there was really 15 minutes or 30 minutes, there was no rounds or anything. So that's a pretty good time, pretty long time to go. And you could grab the rope for escapes and stuff, if I got a submission hold. So, the biggest difference, I think, when I went from Japan to NHB and the UFC was everything else I could deal with. The only thing that you really had to work on or really had to really understand the danger of was headbutts. Because at any place, anywhere, on the mat, standing up, you could get headbutts in the nose, in the chin, in the eye. So to me, I mean, that's the biggest thing you had to worry about when you made a transition from any other thing was those headbutts.
Well, and if you're fighting Keith Hackney, I think there's other things you had to worry about as well.
Yeah, well, especially when he was fighting Joe-san. About 30
Yeah,
shots.
that's exactly. Of course, we all felt sorry for Joe-san at the time, but I think nowadays we all, he got what he had coming. Maybe he deserved a little more than that.
Well, if you actually saw, the way he dressed in Japan with his pink tights and everything, I'm not sure he had balls. I'm not sure if he had to worry about nut shots.
Well, I actually didn't put him out. I was pretty surprised because I definitely would have been tapping out. One thing I read about. What's that?
I said now when he's just lifting his foot up and he's not screaming or yelling or anything, that kind of gave it away.
Right. Tell us a little about your fight. I talked to the girls about this earlier. You fought Oleg Taktarov, someone that you were close to. Difference between fighting someone like that and then fighting someone like Tito Ortiz, who you're not friendly with. Hard to focus with friends, or like Shayna Baszler was on. She said she actually gets nastier with her friends. So, what's the difference?
Well, I think the hardest part with that was that, I had actually taken Oleg Taktarov in. He was in Dallas training with Guy Mazger, and they worked with him, and Oleg had struggled a little bit. Well, then he had an opportunity to fight in this tournament, and I was obviously fighting for the super fight title. And so I brought Oleg into my training camp, and I worked with him, and I trained with him to, get him over the hump so, he would win this tournament. Well, I ended up fighting Severn. I choked him out in a minute and 47 seconds. And then right after my fight, I went and worked Oleg's corner because he had just won his first 2 fights, and now he was in the finals with Tank Abbott. And I remember I was working his corner, and I kept screaming at him, don't quit, don't give up, keep fighting, because they were both exhausted. And then he finally ended up choking Tank out, and he won the title. Well, after he had won the title, he had started mentioning something about, fight for the super fight title. And I looked at him and I said, dude, I'm the champion. I got the title. And he looked at me and he goes, well, yeah, but maybe we can work something out where, you do this and that. And I looked at him and I said, listen, Oleg, you got 2 things. One, you can either move on, fight in Japan, or go do something else. Or 2, if you get in the ring with me, I'm going to hurt you. And so the whole time I kicked him out of my gym because he took the fight, and I told him not to do that before we fought, that he wouldn't take that fight. One, he knew I could whip his ass anyways, but the problem was I had these guys going over to Japan, and I would send them over there. They would make some money, and then part of those fees would come back into the Lions Den. So this was a business for me. And so when he took the fight, I thought to myself, how do I protect my interest here? How do I protect, this business venture I have? So if you watch the fight, and it's very clear, you'll see it very clearly, was that I had an opportunity to tap him out with a leg lock, an arm bar, or a choke. But I knew if I got him in one of these submission holds that he wouldn't tap, and then I would break something, and then he would be out of fighting for 6 months or a year, and I would lose money. So what I did do, and you watched the fight, is I said, you know what, I'll knock him out. I figure if I knock him out, at least he'll be able to come back a couple months later, I'll send him to Japan, he'll make some money, and he'll be okay. So that was my whole game plan when I fought him, was to knock him out. Well, the guy had harder hit than a rock. And I remember I knocked him out 2 or 3 different times where his eyes would go back into his head, and then he came back to again. So, the next morning, and I don't know if anybody's ever saw a picture, but the next morning, this guy looked like the Elephant Man. His eyes were swollen shut. His head was bigger than his butt. He looked bad. I thought he was watching dead. And but hey, you know what? My plan worked, because like 2 months later, I sent him to Japan to fight over in Japan, the circuit over there, because I booked him over there, and he was under contract with me. So my plan worked, but I thought I'd be able to finish him a little bit earlier. But he had a rock, man.
What was it like in those early UFC days? Now it's kind of so corporate. Everyone has all these huge gyms. But, back in the early days, and the one thing I kind of miss, is this is before everyone was, a hybrid and training everything. It was so cool having everybody come in. Okay, this guy's a wrestler, this guy's a ninjutsu guy, and this guy's a, taekwondo. What was it like backstage with you guys? Was it all, real competitive as far as the arts go and what your particular strength was?
It was different, like now it really is. It's a business, and you got to be careful. Your managers have got to take care of your fighters, because there's so many good fighters out there. And and let's face it, this is a business. These guys are fighting for a career in a way to take care of their family years down the road. And so, like when I fought, you took on whoever they put in front of you. It could have been that night they would change the fight, but you still fought them. You could be going into the next round, and the guy that you're supposed to fight breaks his hand, so they put in a fresh guy. You could bitch and complain about that, but you know what? In those days, you fought who they put in front of you. You didn't care who it was. Nowadays, it's a business, and these guys are too good to be just fighting somebody they throw in on you. And I remember just not too long ago, Jones, where he was gonna fight Chael Sonnen, and I remember his manager said, that's a bad idea, and I agreed with it 100%. I know he took a lot of flack for that, but this is a business today, and if you plan on having any success in your career, obviously you take the number 1 contender or the number 2 contender. If that's who they booked you to fight, you fight that fight. But if that guy happens to get hurt and he can't continue on, and they throw in somebody like a Chael Sonnen or somebody on top of that, and you're not ready for that fight, you haven't practiced for that particular fighter, and you're going to take that on short notice, one, it's bad business for the company, for Dana White to even do something like that, and then put his champion down, and then on top of it, for Chael Sonnen to have that opportunity when he hasn't even earned it. There's other guys out there who were in line for that shot that they could have put in there that would have been a better fight for Jones. He took a guy who I thought was probably much dangerous than Chael, which, he based, quick work of him. But, it is different than it was before. You took on whoever was out there. You didn't care who they put in against you, and you did your job. But today, it's different. And I thought it was real untasteful for not only some of the fans, but for a businessman, Dana White, to put down a guy who was their champion and who has showed so much class in his fighting, and he is so good in what he does, to put him down because his manager tells him, listen, that's not the fight we trained for.
Yeah, it's kind of strange with Dana White. Obviously you've had your ups and downs with him. It seems to me almost like he's worried about anyone besides himself being the face or the star of the UFC. Did you find in your dealings with him, like he's kind of, really obsessed with making sure that, he's the number 1 star in the whole organization?
Dana White, And I think it happens to everybody. You know, I got caught up in it, and I know other guys get caught up in it. You know, when you have money, that's good, right? And you can get caught up in that. But when you have power and everybody, you know, you have control over a lot of people, and they need your word to be able to have a career. That's a lot of power for one person to have. And I think sometimes when you get to that position, you forget that you don't have a right to put people down. You don't have a right to control people's future. You're only there for one reason only, and that's to try and promote the best fights that you can. And it's not about putting your opinion in on a fighter or this or that. You know, you stick to what you do. Dana White has gotten into a position where he believes that he is bigger than the UFC. He wants to be the guy. When you say UFC, you say Dana White. Dana White challenged Tito Ortiz to a fight one time. I mean, what if Dana White would have fought Tito and he would have beat Tito in a boxing match? Okay, let me say this. You were trying to make money for your business and your company. Why in the hell would you jeopardize beating one of your stars who was drawing you big-time pay-per-view numbers, other than your ego on him?
You know, going back, you know, something that, you know, like I said, I love the old UFC stuff. You know, we've had Art Jimerson on. We've had Fred Edish on. Going back to the early UFC, you lost your first fight with Royce Gracie. Second fight was at UFC 5, right, I believe. Tell us about that. It got declared a draw. You know, obviously they didn't have judges back in the day. If there were, you would have won. How aggravating was that you, because I know you wanted the revenge, that you weren't able to get it because it went to a time limit?
Well, back, you know, in the very first one, I really, just as we were talking about a little bit earlier being cocky, I was over in Japan. I was the first foreigner ever to capture a title in Japan. I felt really good. I came into this fight. I remember watching Royce Gracie a little bit with arm bars, different things like that. And then, you know, to me, it looked like a guy rolling around in pajamas. I didn't give him any respect. And so, you know, by doing that, I ended up getting caught in a choke. And I remember myself at the Pancrase party, and I remember saying to myself and the people that were with me, I said, that will never happen again. I was so angry at myself for not being prepared, for not taking it serious. And so I said to myself, I promise you that will never happen to me again. And I remember it took me a while because I broke my hand. I was trying to make a comeback on that. I broke my hand, so it pushed me back a little bit. But all the same, I was fighting over in Japan at the same time. I remember I got in there against Royce Gracie the second time, and we never got to fight. You know, I ended up, I tore my ACL, not tore my ACL, but my meniscus, and I frayed my ACL, and I remember shooting it up, and I fought anyways. And then when the Royce dropped out after chemo put a beating on him, Royce still won, but Royce couldn't come out and fight again. Well, I ended up choosing not to go in there and fight, even though I probably would have won that hands down, but to me, the risk of blowing my knee out was too high, but I would have done it if Royce was there. And so I remember going in and getting it cleaned up a little bit, and then I remember Bob Myers put together a fight called a super fight, where there would be no way that Royce could duck me. There would be no way that we wouldn't be able to meet each other, and we did that fight. And I trained for a 2-hour fight. I was willing to go 2 hours, and then I was going to submit them. The one thing they bragged about most was they were the best conditioned athletes in the world. Any place, anytime, anywhere, and it didn't matter how big they were. They could beat anybody. So I had a couple things I was going to prove. One, I was going to wear him out so bad that by the time, however long it took, which would probably been about an hour and 45 minutes, hour and a half, which I kind of figured it would take, that he wouldn't be able to lift his legs up, he wouldn't be able to lift his arms up, and then I would slap him around, and then I would tap him out. And I remember that was my game plan going into my training, and that's what I did. I trained for a 2-hour fight. 3 days prior to that event, they go in the room and they sit us down and tell us they're going to put a time limit in. They're going to put a 30-minute time limit in. And I remember sitting there looking across the thing at Oleg Gracie, and I was looking at him going, really? Seriously? I said, how does this work? I said, this is completely against everything that you guys believe in. And they said, well, it's just the TV and time and this and that, and they have to put these things in. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I did the fight, but I couldn't change my game plan. I mean, I had already trained for this. I was already locked and loaded. And And so there's no way I could change what I had already worked for. So I went in there, and if you watch the fight real carefully, it wasn't anything big, it wasn't anything fast, it wasn't anything explosive. It was about working his body. It was about working his body, working his head, and working him so bad that if you look at it, they put another 2 extra time limits in there. It was supposed to be 30 minutes only, and Hoyt screamed out 3 more minutes. And I said, okay. And then after that 3 minutes, he screamed out 3 more minutes. And I remember Hoyt looking at his brother going, what? Because Hoyt was dead. I mean, he was literally dragging. And if we would have not had a time limit, I would have been able to prove every point in that fight, whereas he couldn't have gone with me with the distance, and I would have submitted him. And then all those myths that they had been screaming and yelling about like monkeys for so long, I would have put an end to it. But unfortunately, they put that time limit in there, and if you watch the fight, though, I was just short of making that happen.
Right. Now, do you think that, they had the whole thing, that no one could beat him, no one could beat jiu-jitsu and that kind of thing. Well, since Royce and, and if you want to say Hickson before that, they haven't really made the impact in MMA, in the last dozen years or so. Do you think that they've been too hard-headed as far as their overall reluctance to evolve and to incorporate other parts in their game? Because obviously jiu-jitsu alone doesn't cut it anymore.
Well, I don't think it's hard-headed. I just think, sports in itself is very, very difficult for anybody to rise to the top and be the best, especially when a sport has been around a long time and you have training methods, you have trainers, and, people start when they're 5 years old now. So it's difficult. There's guys out there who have been jiu-jitsu guys who have made it to the top and been champions, but to have the control and the power that, the Lions Den had at the time and that the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu had at the time, it's very difficult for that to happen today. You may get one guy, and if lucky, 2 guys that would be in the top being able to win all the time at that level. Because the sport has developed so much that there's so many good fighters out there, it's hard to have, 2 guys in one team to be able to do that anymore. So it's not because they haven't developed, because I think that they're not stupid. I think they realize that they have to develop. And if you see what, Royce did with Taktarov the second time around, he worked on his striking, and then he got stronger, and he beat him the second time around. So I don't think it's because they're not developing. I just think it's because it's just now, instead of having 300 or 400 good fighters, now you got 3,000 or 4,000 good fighters.